What's the biggest lie society collectively agrees to ignore? Story 1. This one isn't physics, it's psychology. We like to believe meritocracy is clean and neutral. Work hard, be talented, make good choices, and you'll rise. Simple input, simple output. And effort does matter. Skill matters, discipline matters, but they don't operate in a vacuum. Timing matters. Being born in the right decade matters. Geography matters, who your parents are matters, who returns your email matters. Whether you get sick at the wrong moment matters. Luck, good and bad, does a shocking amount of invisible lifting. The uncomfortable part isn't that hard work doesn't count. It's that the playing field isn't level. Two people can put in identical effort and get wildly different outcomes, because one had access to better schools, safer neighborhoods, financial cushions, social networks, or just random chance. One person's failure might be laziness. Another's might have bad timing. From the outside, they can look the same. Believing outcomes are purely earned is emotionally tidy. It lets successful people feel fully deserving. It lets everyone believe the system is fair. It turns chaos into order. If success equals virtue, then the world makes sense. But once you admit that starting lines are uneven, the story gets messier. It means some wins aren't purely personal triumphs, and some losses aren't purely personal faults. Meritocracy isn't a complete lie. It's just not clean. It's an effort interacting with structure, randomness, access, and timing, all at once. And that's harder to turn into a slogan. Story 2. This one sounds simple, almost patriotic. Politicians work for us. In theory, they do. In a democracy, elected officials are public servants. They're chosen by voters. They're paid with tax dollars. Their job is supposed to be representing the interests of the people who elected them. That's the clean version. The messy version is that incentives shape behavior more than slogans do. Politicians don't just answer to voters. They answer to the party leadership, donors, lobbyists, media cycles, re-election pressure, special interest groups, powerful industries, internal party primaries, coalition deals, international pressures, bureaucratic constraints. Every decision sits inside a web of trade-offs. If a politician makes a choice that's broadly popular with voters but angers major donors or party leadership, there can be consequences. Funding dries up, committee assignments disappear, primary challengers appear, media narratives shift. So the question isn't, do they work for us? It's who influences the incentives the most. Voters absolutely have power. Elections matter. Public opinion matters. Grassroots movements have changed laws before. But influence isn't evenly distributed. Money amplifies voices. Access opens doors. Time and organization shape outcomes. It's comforting to imagine a straight line. We vote, they serve. Reality looks more like a tangled network of competing pressures. Politicians don't operate in a vacuum. They operate in systems. And systems tend to reward survival first, idealism second. Story 3. That all you need to do to get out of poverty is work hard. It's the cleanest story we tell ourselves. Work hard, stay disciplined, make good choices, and you'll climb out. If you don't, you must not have tried hard enough. And hard work absolutely matters, no question. But it's not the only variable in the equation. Poverty isn't just a lack of effort. It's a lack of margin. No financial cushion, no safety net, no room for mistakes. When you're broke, a flat tire isn't annoying. It can cost you your job. A medical bill isn't inconvenient. It can wipe you out. One bad month can spiral into years. Meanwhile, people with resources can take risks. They can move for better jobs. They can take unpaid internships. They can fail and recover. They can wait out bad timing. Two people can grind equally hard and end up in completely different places because one had stability and one had chaos. Effort increases your odds. It doesn't erase structural barriers, random timing, inherited advantages, or pure luck. The reason we like the just work hard story is because it's comforting. It makes success feel fully earned and failure feel fully deserved. It turns a complicated system into a moral scoreboard, but reality is messier. Hard work matters. It just doesn't operate on a level playing field. Story 4. That diamonds are inherently valuable. At the end of the day, they're just shiny rocks. Crystallized carbon, the same element that makes up pencil lead and most of your body. The only difference is pressure, heat, and time. They're not especially rare in a geological sense. Large diamond deposits exist in multiple parts of the world. And today, we can manufacture lab-grown diamonds that are chemically and physically identical to mined ones. Same hardness, same sparkle, same crystal. So why are they expensive? Scarcity isn't purely natural, it's controlled. Historically, a small number of companies managed supply, stockpiled stones, and released them strategically to maintain the perception of rarity. At the same time, Advertising campaigns linked diamonds to love, commitment, and status. A diamond is forever wasn't an ancient tradition. It was marketing. And it worked. Now there's social pressure wrapped around a mineral. Engagement rings should cost a certain amount. Bigger stones signal success. The price becomes emotional, not practical. That doesn't mean diamonds have zero value. They're durable, they're beautiful to many people. They have industrial uses, but their price isn't a law of physics. It's a story, a collective agreement that this specific arrangement of carbon represents romance, achievement, permanence. We're not really paying for hardness or sparkle. We're paying for what we've decided it means. Story 5. That money doesn't buy happiness. You hear it all the time, usually from people who already have enough of it. And technically, it's half true. Money doesn't magically fix your personality. It doesn't guarantee purpose. It doesn't create deep relationships out of thin air. But pretending money has nothing to do with happiness is absurd. Money buys stability. It buys safety. It buys options. It buys the ability to handle emergencies without panic. It buys time back. It buys better neighborhoods, better healthcare, better food, better education. It reduces chronic stress. And chronic stress is one of the biggest drains on mental well-being. There's a huge emotional difference between being sad in a stable home and being sad while wondering how you're going to pay rent. Research consistently shows that as income rises, life satisfaction tends to rise too, especially when moving from poverty to financial security. The biggest jump in well-being happens when basic needs stop being a daily threat. After a certain point, more money has diminishing returns. Going from $30,000 to $80,000 changes your life. Going from $5 million to $10 million probably doesn't double your happiness. But the idea that money and happiness are completely unrelated, that's comforting fiction. It allows people to romanticize struggle and dismiss inequality. It makes wealth feel spiritually irrelevant. Money doesn't guarantee happiness, but it absolutely buys freedom from a lot of misery. And freedom from misery is a pretty big piece of happiness. Story 6. That we're all born equal. It sounds noble. It sounds like something you'd put in a founding document. But biologically, economically, geographically, we are not born into equal conditions. Some people are born healthy, some aren't. Some are born into stable families with resources, networks, and safety. Others are born into chaos, poverty, violence, or neglect. Some are born in countries with functioning institutions and opportunity. Others aren't. That's not ideology. That's an observable reality. Even at the genetic level, people are born with different cognitive tendencies, physical abilities, temperaments, and vulnerabilities. Some people have natural advantages in memory, height, athleticism, and stress tolerance. Others face challenges before they ever make a choice. The part we blur is the distinction between equal worth and equal starting position. Equal worth is a moral principle. It says every person deserves dignity and rights. Equal starting position is a factual claim, and that one just isn't true. We don't enter the world on a level playing field. We enter it on different squares of the board. The reason we repeat the phrase is because it's aspirational. It's a goal, a value we want to aim toward. But pretending it's already true makes it easier to ignore how uneven the starting lines actually are. We may be equal in value. We are not equal in circumstance. And confusing those two ideas keeps the conversation comfortably simple. Story 7. That being rich means you work hard and are intelligent. It's a clean story. Wealth equals merit. If someone has a lot of money, they must be disciplined, smart, and strategic. If someone doesn't, they must have lacked effort or ability. And sure, plenty of wealthy people are hardworking and intelligent. But that's not the whole equation. There are insanely hardworking people who will never be rich. Nurses pulling double shifts, construction workers wrecking their bodies, small business owners grinding for years. Effort alone doesn't determine income. And intelligence isn't a guaranteed wealth machine either. There are brilliant scientists, teachers, and artists who make modest salaries. Meanwhile, some people inherit wealth before they've demonstrated anything at all. Money flows through systems: inheritance, access to capital, networks, timing, market conditions, geographic location, industry trends. Pure luck. Getting into tech in the 90s is different than trying to break in today. Buying property at the right time versus the wrong time can change everything. Wealth often compounds. If you start with money, it's easier to make more. If you start without it, the risk is more dangerous. The idea that rich equals smarter and harder working is comforting. It makes inequality feel fair. It turns economics into a moral scoreboard. But reality is messier. Hard work and intelligence help. They just aren't the only variables, and they're not evenly distributed in opportunity. Wealth isn't a pure IQ test. It's effort interacting with access, timing, leverage, and sometimes sheer luck. Story 8. That society is healthy, not economically, not politically, not psychologically, We normalize things that would look insane if you zoomed out. Chronic stress is a baseline. People sleep 5 hours a night and call it ambition. Kids growing up online 24/7. Loneliness rates climbing while we're more connected than ever. News cycles engineered to trigger outrage because outrage keeps us scrolling. We call it normal because it's common. But common isn't the same as healthy. Anxiety and depression rates have surged in many countries. Attention spans are shrinking. Trust in institutions is falling. Political polarization is extreme. A lot of people feel overworked, underpaid, and one emergency away from financial panic. And yet we move through it like this is just how things are supposed to feel. If an individual lived in constant stress, consumed a steady diet of fear and comparison, slept poorly, rarely disconnected, and distrusted everyone around them, we wouldn't call that person healthy. We'd call that person overwhelmed. But when millions of people live that way at once, we call it modern life. That doesn't mean everything is broken. There's progress too. Technology, medicine, opportunity, information, all incredible. But health isn't just survival or GDP growth. It's stable, trust, meaning, connection, rest. And if you measure by those, the picture gets a lot less comfortable. The lie isn't that society functions. It's that functioning automatically means being healthy. Story 9, that we have a justice system that treats everyone the same. In theory, the law is neutral. Blindfolded statue, equal under the rules, same consequences for the same actions. That's the story. In practice, outcomes often depend on money, status, and access. If you can afford top-tier lawyers, you get more time, more strategy, more leverage. You can negotiate, you can delay, you can settle. If you can't afford that, you're relying on overworked public defenders juggling dozens or hundreds of cases. Bail systems mean someone with cash waits for trial at home, keeps their job, stays with their family. Someone without cash sits in jail for the same alleged offense, sometimes pressured into plea deals just to get out. White-collar crimes that move millions of dollars can result in fines. Low-level crimes tied to poverty can result in jail time. Corporate misconduct might be treated as regulatory violations. Petty theft might be treated as criminal. That doesn't mean laws exist only to keep poor people in line. There are violent criminals who are prosecuted. There are powerful people who face consequence. Courts do function, but the system doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates inside economic inequality, and when inequality is wide, justice starts to bend. The comforting version says, break the law, face the consequences. The uncomfortable version asks, who writes the laws, who enforces them, and who can afford to fight them? Justice may be an ideal, but access to it isn't evenly distributed. Story 10, that any of us can become wealthy. It's one of the most powerful stories modern culture runs on. Anyone can make it, anyone can rise, anyone can be a millionaire if they grind hard enough and make the right moves. And technically, it's possible. But possible and probable are not the same thing. Wealth, especially serious wealth, isn't just about effort. It's about leverage, ownership, equity, access to capital, networks, timing, being in the right industry at the right moment, taking risks that don't wipe you out if they fail. Most people don't start with those advantages. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, your margin for risk is tiny. You can't easily quit your job to build a startup. You can't survive multiple failed investments. You can't float yourself for years while something slowly takes off. Meanwhile, people who start with money can multiply it. Capital earns returns. Connections open doors. One good break compounds into 5 more. That doesn't mean upward mobility is fake. People absolutely rise. Some build businesses from nothing, some invest smartly, some climb through education and skill. But statistically, most people remain close to the economic tier they were born into. The dream works best as motivation. It works less well than math. The comforting version says, if you didn't become wealthy, you didn't try hard enough. The harder version says, the ladder exists, but not everyone starts at the same rung, and not everyone even gets near it. Story 11, that pregnancy and childbirth are easy. They're often described as natural, which quietly turns into simple in people's minds. As if because the human body can do it, it must be straightforward and safe. It's not. Pregnancy radically alters nearly every system in the body. Hormones surge. Blood volume increases dramatically. The heart works harder. Organs shift. The immune system changes. Metabolism changes. The musculoskeletal system adjusts to carry added weight in a shifting center of gravity. And that's in a healthy, uncomplicated pregnancy. There are real risks. Gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, hemorrhage, infection, emergency C-sections, blood clots, severe tearing, long-term pelvic floor damage, postpartum depression and anxiety. In rare cases, death. Maternal mortality still exists. Even in developed countries, most pregnancies end with a healthy parent and baby. That's important to say. Modern medicine has made childbirth far safer than it was historically, but common does not mean easy. It's physically intense, it can be traumatic, recovery can take weeks, months, sometimes longer. Bodies don't always bounce back, some changes are permanent. The reason we soften the reality is cultural. We romanticize motherhood, we highlight the joy and downplay the risk. It's more comfortable to focus on baby showers than blood loss. But informed choices require real information. Before anyone chooses motherhood, they deserve to understand what their body may endure, the beauty and the cost. Natural doesn't mean effortless. It means powerful, and power comes with risk. Story 12, that women are safe in Western nations. Safer than where? Compared to many parts of the world, women in Western countries often have more legal protections, more educational access, more economic opportunity. That part is real, but safer doesn't mean safe. Rates of assault, domestic violence, stalking, and harassment are still significant across the US, Canada, the UK, Europe, Australia. A large percentage of women report experiencing some form of harassment in their lifetime. Intimate partner violence remains one of the most common threats, and it usually comes from someone the victim knows. Most assaults aren't happening in dark alleys by strangers. They're happening in homes, dorms, workplaces, parties. There are also safety gaps in healthcare, workplace protection, and legal follow-through. Reporting rates are low, conviction rates can be lower. Social stigma still exists. Online harassment adds another layer that didn't exist a generation ago. None of this means Western nations are uniquely dangerous. It means no country has eliminated gender-based risk. The phrase "women are safe here" is comforting. It suggests the problem is solved, that progress equals complete. But safety isn't binary, it's relative. And when you zoom into lived experiences instead of legal frameworks, the picture is more complicated. Progress has happened, but safe and safer aren't the same word. And pretending they are can make it easier to stop paying attention. Story 13. Those rules matter equally for everyone. We're taught early that rules are the foundation of fairness. Follow them and you'll be fine. Break them and there will be consequences. The system is neutral. The boundaries apply to all of us the same way. That's the story. In reality, enforcement is selective. Some people break rules and get punished immediately. Others break bigger rules and negotiate. Fines replace jail time. Settlements replace trials. Mistakes were made replaces accountability. Speed limits matter more to someone without political connections. Tax errors matter more to someone without high-end accountants. A minor record can close doors for one person while another person's larger scandal barely dents their trajectory. Rules exist, they're written down, they're real. But power changes how rules land. Influence buys time, money buys defense, status buys the benefit of the doubt. If consequences are inconsistent, the rule isn't functioning the same way across the board. That doesn't mean rules are meaningless. Societies need them. Most people follow them. Many are enforced fairly every day, but the comforting version says rules are rules. The uncomfortable version says rules are filtered through hierarchy. They don't disappear at the top. They just bend more easily. And pretending they don't is what keeps the illusion clean. Story 14. That any religion is beyond question. Religion can offer community, moral frameworks, meaning comfort in grief, structure in chaos. For billions of people, it's deeply personal and profoundly important. But when any belief system, religious or otherwise, is treated as untouchable, it stops being examined and starts being protected. Every major religion was shaped by human beings, interpreted by human beings, institutionalized by human beings. That means power structures, politics, cultural biases, and historical context inevitably influence doctrine and practice. And yet criticism is often framed as hostility rather than inquiry. The uncomfortable part isn't that religion exists. It's that institutions built around belief can accumulate authority without accountability. Leaders can gain influence. Rules can be enforced unevenly. Harm can be minimized or dismissed in the name of protecting the faith. This doesn't mean religion is inherently false or harmful. It means belief systems operate inside human systems, and human systems are imperfect. The comforting version says, this is sacred, therefore it's right. The harder version asks, who interprets it, who benefits from it, and who bears the cost? Faith can be meaningful. Community can be powerful. But no institution, religious, political, corporate, or cultural, should be immune from scrutiny. Once something becomes unquestionable, that's usually when it deserves questions the most. Story 15, that money doesn't grow on trees. We say it like money is this scarce physical thing dug out of the earth and carefully rationed. But modern money isn't gold. It isn't backed by silver. It isn't tied to some vault of treasure anymore. It's mostly numbers in databases. Central banks can create new money digitally. Commercial banks create money every time they issue loans. When a bank approves a mortgage, it doesn't hand over existing cash from a pile in the back room. It credits your account with newly created deposit money. That's how most money enters the system. It feels solid, but it's largely digital accounting. Since the gold standard ended in the 20th century, currencies like the US dollar aren't backed by a physical commodity. They're fiat currencies. Their value comes from government authority, taxation power, economic output, and collective trust. And yes, enforcement matters. Governments require taxes to be paid in their currency. They enforce contracts in that currency. That creates demand for it. So money isn't grown, it's issued. But here's the part people oversimplify. That doesn't mean it's unlimited or meaningless. If too much is created relative to goods and services, you get inflation. If trust collapses, the currency weakens. The system only works because people collectively agree it works. Story 16. That technology has been a net positive for most people's wallets. It feels true at first glance. Tech made things cheaper, information is free, communication is instant, you can start a business from your laptop, markets are more accessible, productivity exploded. But more productive doesn't automatically mean more prosperous for everyone. Yes, technology created trillion-dollar companies and minted millionaires. It lowered costs in some areas. It opened global markets. It also automated entire job categories. It concentrated wealth into fewer hands. It replaced middle-skill roles with software. It shifted profits toward platforms and away from labor. For many workers, wages haven't risen at the same pace as productivity or corporate profits. The value created by technology doesn't distribute evenly. If you own equity in tech companies, you likely benefited massively. If you're selling labor that can be automated or outsourced, the story looks different. Gig economy platforms created flexibility. They also removed stability and benefits. E-commerce made shopping cheaper. It also crushed small local businesses in many regions. Technology increases efficiency. But efficiency often means doing more with fewer people. The comforting version says, innovation lifts all boats. The uncomfortable version says, innovation lifts some yachts and pokes holes in some rowboats. Technology absolutely improves lives in countless ways. Medicine, access to knowledge, global opportunity. But when it comes specifically to wallets, the gains haven't been evenly distributed, and pretending they have kept the narrative simple. Story 17, that if a kid doesn't understand something today, they'll just get it tomorrow. A lot of parents believe that if their child didn't learn what was taught at school, it's fine to skip the homework. They'll catch up later, tomorrow's another day. Sometimes that's true, but learning isn't a reset button. Most subjects are layered. Math builds on yesterday's concept. Reading comprehension builds on vocabulary built years earlier. Science stacks ideas on top of ideas. When a gap forms and doesn't get filled, the next lesson doesn't land cleanly. Then the next one doesn't either. Small misunderstandings compound. And kids are very good at hiding confusion. They nod, they copy, they memorize just enough to pass a quiz. But if the foundation is shaky, confidence drops. Once confidence drops, engagement drops. Then effort drops. Homework isn't just busy work, even though sometimes it is. It's repetition, reinforcement, a second exposure to the concept when the classroom pace was too fast the first time. Skipping one night won't ruin anything, but turning "I didn't get it" into "I'll get it eventually" without intervention can snowball. The comforting version says kids will naturally catch up. The harder version says learning gaps don't close themselves. They widen quietly. And by the time they're obvious, the repair work is much heavier than the original effort would have been. Story 18. I have a hard time wondering how a massive portion of American society genuinely believes that Trump rightfully won the 2020 election. It was extensively investigated by neutral professional investigators, and each of the claimed compromises were found to lack merit. I get that some folks are prone to believing that there is a massive conspiracy and that everyone doing the investigation was compromised, but the sheer number of people who believe that leaves me genuinely puzzled. Also, I fail to understand why these people recognize his current presidency as constitutionally valid if he won the 2020 election. As a president can't be elected 3 times. I'm really not trying to start crap here, but it's completely baffling to me. They wanted an investigation, they got an investigation. A really big one, like nothing history has seen before. Meticulous, lawful, objective, and including a lot of the people who they demanded to have investigated. And there was nothing except mishandling of a couple thousand ballots max, which seems pretty standard for any large election, especially considering that those few ballots weren't politically biased in either direction. Plus, it's impossible to have a rational debate with people who believe it. It just turns into name-calling and accusations of purported psychometric test abnormalities. Story 19. That people in the US are wildly, constantly suing each other. The The stereotype is that Americans are hyper-litigious, that everyone is one spilled coffee away from a lawsuit, that courts are flooded with petty claims because people are greedy or looking for a payout. But the phrase, "I'll sue you," gets thrown around way more than actual lawsuits get filed. Litigation is expensive, time-consuming, emotionally draining. Even when someone has a legitimate grievance, hiring an attorney, navigating the system, and waiting months or years for resolution isn't something most people are eager to do. A huge percentage of disputes never make it to trial. Many never even make it to a filed complaint. They get dropped, settled informally, mediated, or simply absorbed because pursuing legal action isn't worth the cost. The US does have a strong civil litigation system compared to many countries. Contingency fees and jury trials make lawsuits more accessible in some cases. But accessible isn't the same as commonplace. The threat of a lawsuit often carries more cultural weight than the reality of one. It's leverage in an argument, a pressure tactic, a way to signal seriousness. The comforting narrative says Americans are sue happy and courts are chaotic. The less dramatic reality is that most people don't want to be anywhere near a courtroom unless they absolutely have to. The phrase is loud. The follow-through usually isn't. Story 20, that our economic system is purely immoral and exists only to benefit a tiny, corrupt minority. That narrative feels powerful because inequality is real. Wealth concentration is real. Corruption exists. There are absolutely wealthy individuals and corporations who exploit systems, avoid accountability, and commit serious crimes. Power can distort incentives, money can shield bad behavior, but saying the entire system exists only for a predatory elite oversimplifies something much bigger. Modern market economies have also lifted billions of people out of extreme poverty over the past century. Global life expectancy has risen. Infant mortality has fallen. Access to food, medicine, and education has expanded dramatically compared to historical baselines. None of that happened in a vacuum. The same system that produces billionaires also produces mass employment, supply chains, innovation, small businesses, and retirement savings for ordinary people. Most wealth isn't sitting in cartoon vaults. It's invested in companies, infrastructure, pensions, and financial systems that millions rely on. That doesn't make the system perfectly fair. It isn't. Opportunity is uneven. Influence is uneven. Regulatory capture happens. Some industries do cause harm. Reform debates are legitimate. But framing the entire global economy as nothing more than a criminal machine for a secret minority erases the complexity. Systems can be flawed, unjust in places, and still generate widespread benefits at the same time. The comforting version says, it's all evil. The harder version says, it's mixed, powerful, imperfect, capable of both enormous good and serious harm. And fixing flaws requires understanding that complexity, not flattening it. Story 21. I have a good friend from high school with whom I'm still in contact. She is naturally beautiful. Blonde, blue eyes, tanned skin, huge dimples, and a big bright smile, and a petite. We had a discussion in my car not too long ago about how women treat her. I agreed. It's like they avoid her, maybe because they are insecure. It is odd how she is treated by women. Then, we laughed because I jokingly said they probably wouldn't if they knew what a little general cow she was. We laughed hard. The contractor working on her home started nicknaming her the Little General because she was so bossy. My point of the story, we are who we are. Story 22, that the general education classroom is the best place for every student to learn the most. It sounds fair. Put everyone in the same room, same curriculum, same pace, same standards. Equal access. But equal placement isn't the same as equal outcome. Classrooms are designed around averages, average pace, average attention span, average learning style, average behavior expectations. That works reasonably well for students near the middle of the distribution. It doesn't work equally well for everyone else. Gifted students can get bored and disengage. Students with learning differences can fall behind quietly. English language learners may struggle to keep up while still translating in their heads. Kids dealing with trauma or instability at home might not have the cognitive bandwidth to focus on algebra at 8 a.m. One teacher managing 25 to 35 students cannot perfectly individualize instruction for every brain in the room. That's not a failure of teachers. It's a structural limitation. Some students thrive in smaller groups. Some need specialized instruction. Some learn best hands-on. Some need repetition at a slower pace. Others need acceleration. The general classroom is efficient, but efficiency isn't the same as optimization for each individual. The comforting version says, one system fits all. The harder version says, different minds require different environments. Equality in seating charts doesn't automatically translate to equality in learning. Story 23, that career achievements result from merit alone. It's a clean narrative. Work hard, be talented, deliver results, rise to the top. promotions and success become proof of skill and effort. Merit absolutely matters, but it doesn't operate in isolation. Access matters. Who mentors you matters. Who advocates for you in rooms you're not in matters. Timing matters. Being in a growing industry versus a shrinking one matters. Joining a company before it explodes versus after it stabilizes matters. Two equally capable people can take different paths simply because one met the right manager early on, or one entered the job market during a recession while the other entered during a boom. Visibility matters too. Some roles put you close to decision makers, others keep you invisible, even if you're just as competent. Personality fit, office politics, communication style, all of it influences who gets noticed. There's also survivorship bias. We see the winners and hear their "I worked hard and never gave up" stories. We don't see the thousands who worked just as hard and didn't get the same break. The comforting version says, success equals merit. The uncomfortable version says, success equals merit, plus opportunity, plus timing, plus network, plus luck. Hard work increases your odds. It just doesn't control the whole equation. And pretending it does makes inequality look like a simple scoreboard instead of a complex system. Story 24. That plastic is food safe, microwave safe, BPA free, FDA approved, end of story. But food safe doesn't mean inert. It doesn't mean nothing transfers. It means that under specific testing conditions, chemical migration is below certain regulatory thresholds considered acceptable. That's a very different claim. Plastics are made with polymers plus additives, plasticizers, stabilizers, colorants. Over time, especially with heat, fat, acidity, or wear and tear, small amounts of these substances can migrate into food. Even BPA-free plastics often use alternative compounds that may have similar biological activity. Research on long-term, low-dose exposure is still evolving. Then there's microplastics, tiny fragments shed from containers, packaging, utensils, and bottles. They've been found in water, seafood, table salt, even human blood and placental tissue. We don't yet fully understand the long-term health implications. Now, to be clear, regulatory agencies don't just randomly stamp approval. Most approved food contact plastics are considered low risk when used as intended. The system isn't labeling poison as safe, but safe in regulation usually means risk within acceptable limits, not zero interaction with your body. The comforting version says, if it's on the shelf, it's harmless. The more precise version says, it's considered safe within current evidence and thresholds. That's not the same as biologically invisible. Plastic is convenient, cheap, ubiquitous, but calling it purely neutral oversimplifies a much more complicated reality. Story 25. Follow your passion and the money will come. It sounds inspiring, almost magical. Do what you love and the universe will reward you for it. And sometimes that happens, but not because passion has mystical earning power. Money follows value in a market. It follows demand, scarcity, leverage, distribution, timing. You can be deeply passionate about something that very few people are willing to pay for. You can love poetry, painting, niche history, indie game design, or handmade crafts, and still struggle financially because the market is small or saturated. Meanwhile, someone who isn't particularly passionate about logistics software or enterprise cybersecurity might earn millions because the demand is massive and the supply of skill is limited. Passion helps with stamina. It helps you endure boring hours and setbacks. It keeps you going when results are slow. But passion alone doesn't create customers. There's also survivorship bias. We hear from the musician who made it big, the YouTuber who blew up, the founder who turned a hobby into a billion-dollar company. We don't hear from the thousands who followed the same advice and quietly ran out of savings. The comforting version says, love what you do and money will follow. The harder version says, love what you do and understand the economics of it. Passion is fuel. But markets decide where the road goes. Story 26. That being cold or getting wet gives you a virus. You've heard it your whole life. Don't go outside with wet hair. Don't sit in damp clothes. Bundle up or you'll catch a cold. But cold weather does not create viruses. Viruses are biological particles. To get sick, you have to be exposed to one, like rhinovirus, influenza, RSV. They don't appear in your body because you stepped outside without a jacket. So why does the myth feel true? Because illness spikes in colder months. But that's mostly behavioral and environmental. When it's cold, people spend more time indoors, windows stay closed, air circulates less. We're in closer contact with each other. That makes transmission easier. There's also some evidence that cold, dry air can slightly weaken local immune defenses in your nasal passages, making it easier for a virus you're already exposed to take hold. But that's very different from the cold puts the virus in you. Getting wet doesn't inject pathogens into your bloodstream. Exposure does. The comforting version says, stay warm and you'll be safe. The accurate version says, avoid infected people, wash your hands, and don't touch your face after grabbing a public door handle. Cold weather is uncomfortable. Viruses are biological, and the two only connect when people do. Story 27, that marketing label means what they sound like. Flushable? Wipes? Most plumbing systems and wastewater departments will tell you they're not truly flushable. They don't break down like toilet paper. They clog pipes, jam pumps, and create massive sewer blockages. The label usually means can physically go down a toilet, not safely dissolves in real-world infrastructure. Essential oils. The word essential doesn't mean necessary for your health. It refers to the essence of a plant, the concentrated aromatic compounds extracted from it. They can smell great. Some have mild effects, but the word sounds medically vital when it isn't. Contains real fruit, made with real cheese, with natural ingredients. Those phrases often mean a tiny percentage of the product meets that description. 1 drop of concentrate can justify contains real juice. Natural isn't tightly regulated in many contexts. It can legally include highly processed substances derived from natural sources. Even all natural doesn't mean unprocessed. And organic has a specific regulatory meaning in food, but outside of that, it's often just aesthetic branding. The trick isn't that companies are always outright lying. It's that labels are optimized for legal defensibility, not clarity. They're designed to create an impression. The comforting version says, if it's on the package, it must be straightforward. The harder version says, packaging is persuasion wrapped in fine print. Words sell feelings, not necessarily facts. Story 28, that the mental health and medical systems always work and always have our best interests at heart. Healthcare absolutely saves lives. Modern medicine has eradicated diseases, extended life expectancy, reduced infant mortality, performed surgeries that were once unimaginable. Mental health treatment has helped millions manage depression, trauma, anxiety, addiction. That part is real, but systems aren't the same as individual doctors or therapists. Healthcare systems operate inside insurance structures, pharmaceutical markets, hospital profit models, government regulations, and billing codes. Time is rationed, appointments are short, mental health providers are overbooked. Access depends heavily on income, geography, and insurance status. If you have good coverage and live in a major city, your experience can look very different from someone uninsured in a rural area. In mental health especially, misdiagnosis happens, overmedication happens, undertreatment happens, long waitlists are common, and some communities face stigma or cultural barriers that limit access entirely. That doesn't mean doctors are malicious or therapists don't care. Most go into the field to help people, but incentives shape outcomes. Profit motives influence pricing. Insurance dictates what gets covered. Pharmaceutical companies influence research and marketing. The comforting version says, the system exists to heal you. The harder version says, the system exists within economic and political constraints. It can save you. It can fail you. And trusting it blindly is different from navigating it wisely. Story 29, that declining birth rates aren't an issue. In many developed countries, birth rates have fallen below replacement level, meaning populations eventually shrink without immigration. On the surface, that can sound manageable. Fewer people, less strain on resources, right? But demographics aren't that simple. Modern economies are structured like pyramids. A large working-age population supports a smaller retired population through taxes and social programs. When birth rates drop for long enough, that pyramid flips. Fewer young workers, more elderly retirees, greater pressure on healthcare systems, pensions, and social safety nets. Countries like Japan, South Korea, Italy, and parts of Eastern Europe are already dealing with aging populations and shrinking workforces. It affects economic growth, innovation, military capacity, and long-term fiscal stability. At the same time, there's another side people ignore. Declining birth rates often reflect real pressures. Rising housing costs, childcare expenses, student debt, unstable job markets, work-life imbalance. Many people aren't choosing to have fewer kids purely out of preference. They're responding to economic reality. So the issue isn't just people aren't having enough babies. It's why they aren't. The comforting version says, population decline will sort itself out. The harder version says, demographics shape everything. Labor markets, housing, taxes, healthcare, and shifts happen slowly but hit hard. It's not panic-worthy, but it's not irrelevant either. Ignoring long-term demographic trends doesn't stop them from reshaping the future. Story 30, that capitalism works. Capitalism has undeniably generated massive wealth, technological innovation, and higher living standards compared to most pre-industrial systems. Markets allocate resources. Competition drives efficiency. Incentives push productivity. Billions of people today have access to goods, medicine, and information that would have been unimaginable centuries ago. That part is real, but works for who? Capitalism optimizes for growth and profit. It does not automatically optimize for equality, environmental sustainability, mental well-being, or long-term stability. If pollution is profitable, markets won't correct it without regulation. If monopolies form, competition shrinks. If labor is oversupplied, wages stagnate. It works extremely well at creating wealth. It's less reliable at distributing it evenly. It rewards ownership of capital more than labor. It compounds advantages over time. Those who start with assets tend to accelerate ahead. Those without assets trade time for income and often struggle to build leverage. That doesn't mean the alternative systems historically performed better. Many didn't. But calling capitalism simply working flattens the nuance. It works at producing growth. It struggles at producing fairness without guardrails. The comforting version says, the market solves problems. The harder version says, the market solves certain problems extremely efficiently and creates others just as efficiently. Whether it works depends entirely on what outcome you're measuring. Story 31, that the world is black and white. We love clean narratives. Good guys and bad guys, right and wrong, smart and stupid, oppressed and oppressor, capitalism is good, capitalism is evil, medicine saves, medicine corrupts, technology helps, technology destroys. Binary thinking feels safe. It reduces complexity into something you can hold in one sentence. It lets you pick a side and feel certain. It turns messy systems into moral cartoons. But reality is layered. Two opposing things can be true at the same time. A system can create wealth and inequality. A person can be both victim and perpetrator in different contexts. A policy can help one group while harming another. An industry can save lives and exploit people. Black and white logic collapses nuance because nuance is uncomfortable. It forces you to admit trade-offs. It forces you to admit uncertainty. It forces you to accept that your side isn't pure. And once people anchor to a narrative, confirmation bias does the rest. We search for evidence that supports our view. We dismiss anything that complicates it. Social media algorithms amplify this because outrage and certainty spread faster than measured complexity. The comforting version says, the answer is obvious. The harder version says, most large-scale issues are systems of incentives, trade-offs, and unintended consequences. Black and white thinking isn't clear. It's compression, and compression always leaves something important out. Story 32. That obesity is automatically beautiful and healthy at every size. This one is emotionally loaded, so people go extreme in both directions. On one side, obesity is purely a personal failure. On the other, weight has no relationship to health at all. Both are oversimplifications. Obesity is strongly associated with increased risks for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, sleep apnea, joint degeneration, certain cancers, and metabolic disorders. That's not a stigma. That's decades of medical data. Excess adipose tissue, especially visceral fat, changes hormonal balance, insulin sensitivity, and inflammation levels. Biology doesn't respond to slogans. But here's the part people ignore on the other end. Shame is not a treatment plan. Social stigma doesn't magically improve metabolic health. Genetics matter, the food environment matters, stress, sleep, medication, socioeconomic status, all influence weight. It's not as simple as just try harder. The phrase health at every size originally aimed to push back against the idea that only thin people deserve dignity or medical care. And that part is valid. People deserve respect regardless of body type. Story 33, that you remain intellectually agile and capable until the end, and even more so with experience, and therefore old people should run everything. In reality, there is sharp cognitive decline from the age of 50-ish, and most countries have some sort of rigid maximum age for high-stakes professions like pilots and surgeons. This is highly masked by people's ability to perform routine tasks relatively well until old age, but ask your fit and sharp parents in their 60s to do something they have never done before, like book a hotel online or set up a new online banking account, and you will see what I mean. It's complete lunacy that we let geriatric patients run the entire world. Story 34. That 99% of the world's problems are caused by 1% of the population. It's a powerful narrative. Clean. Easy to chant. If a tiny elite is responsible for nearly everything wrong, then the solution feels simple. Remove or restrain that 1%. But large-scale problems are rarely that linear. Yes, wealth and power are concentrated. The top 1% controls a disproportionate share of global assets. Corporations and political elites absolutely influence policy, labor markets, environmental regulation, and media narratives. Corruption at high levels can have massive downstream effects. That part is real. But most global issues are systems problems, not villain problems. Climate change isn't caused by one boardroom. It's driven by billions of daily consumption decisions interacting with industrial systems built over centuries. Economic inequality isn't just greed at the top. It's also tax structures, education gaps, automation, trade policy, financialization, and human psychology. Political polarization isn't just elites manipulating people, it's also identity, media, incentives, and social dynamics. Blaming 1% externalizes complexity. It turns distributed responsibility into a single target. The comforting version says, a small group broke everything. The harder version says, incentives, institutions, technology, human behavior, and power structure all interact. The 1% influences the system, but the system also reflects collective participation. Concentrated power matters, but so do culture, demand, policy, and participation. Big problems usually require more than one villain. They require understanding the machine itself. Story 35. That everything happens for a reason. It sounds comforting, almost spiritual, as if every loss, every failure, every tragedy is part of some larger design you'll eventually understand. But a lot of things happen because of randomness, because of physics, because someone made a bad decision, because systems are flawed, because the timing was off by 5 minutes, because cells mutate, because breaks fail, because storms form. Not every event carries a hidden lesson. Not every tragedy is a setup for growth. Sometimes, something just happens. The phrase sticks around because chaos is terrifying. If everything has a reason, then the universe is orderly. Pain becomes purposeful. Suffering becomes a stepping stone. It gives people psychological footing when the ground feels unstable. And sometimes people do grow from hardship. They find meaning afterward. They build resilience. They change direction in ways that lead somewhere better. But meaning created after the fact is different from meaning built into the event. Telling someone to relish hardship can feel invalidating. It subtly suggests they should be grateful for pain that may have been unnecessary or preventable. The comforting version says, trust the plan. The harder version says, life is a mix of cause, chance, and consequence. You can create meaning from what happens, but that doesn't mean it was scripted for your benefit. Sometimes the reason something happened is simply that the world is complicated, and not always fair. Story 36. That mainstream news is purely neutral, or purely evil. You'll hear two extremes. One side says, major news outlets are objective guardians of truth. The other says, they exist solely to protect the rich and manufacture consent for war. Both flatten something more complicated. News organizations operate inside incentives. They rely on advertisers, ratings, subscriptions, access to officials, and corporate ownership structures. That absolutely influences what gets covered, how it's framed, and which stories get amplified versus buried. The media can reinforce elite perspectives, it can echo government narratives, it can oversimplify foreign conflicts, it can chase outrage because outrage keeps viewers engaged. That's real. But pure propaganda machine ignores diversity within journalism. Reporters break corruption stories. Investigative teams expose corporate misconduct. Different outlets often disagree sharply. Journalists aren't a monolith, even if ownership structures sometimes are. The bigger issue is incentive design. The media is a business. War coverage drives attention. Fear drives engagement. Polarization drives clicks. Complex nuance doesn't trend as well as clean narratives. Now layer AI on top of that. As synthetic video, voice cloning, and hyper-realistic text become harder to detect, misinformation can spread faster and more convincingly. Deep fakes blur reality. Fabricated sources look legitimate. Trust erodes further. The comforting version says, trust everything. The cynical version says, trust nothing. The harder version says, trust cautiously. Cross-check, follow incentives. Separate evidence from framing. Media shapes perception. Story 37. That slavery is something that ended in the 1800s. Modern-day slavery still exists. It just doesn't look like chains in a field. Today it shows up as human trafficking, forced labor, debt bondage, forced marriage, and exploitation hidden deep inside global supply chains. According to estimates from organizations like the International Labor Organization, tens of millions of people worldwide are living in conditions that meet the definition of modern slavery. That includes people forced to work in factories, agriculture, mining, fishing vessels, domestic labor, and the trade. Some are trafficked across borders, some are trapped by debt, some have their passports confiscated, some are threatened with violence. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. A migrant worker whose wages are withheld, a child working in dangerous conditions, a person locked into an abusive labor contract with no realistic way out. Even in wealthy countries, Forced labor and trafficking cases are prosecuted every year. It isn't confined to one region or one political system. The uncomfortable part is how entangled it can be with everyday consumption. Complex global supply chains make it hard to see where exploitation happens. Cheap goods often come with invisible human costs somewhere upstream. The comforting version says, we abolished that long ago. The harder version says, we outlawed it. But eradication is another matter. Slavery didn't disappear. It adapted. And pretending it's purely historical makes it easier not to look for it. Story 38. That taxes only benefit the government or that they don't benefit the taxpayer. Or, flip it the other way, that taxes automatically benefit the taxpayer in a clean, proportional way. Both versions miss the nuance. Taxes fund infrastructure, roads, bridges, water systems, power grids, courts, police, fire departments, public schools, air traffic control, disaster response, regulatory agencies, military defense, social security system, public health programs. Even if you don't personally use every service, you live inside a system stabilized by them. Businesses rely on roads, contracts rely on courts, property values rely on infrastructure, markets rely on rule enforcement. In that sense, taxes absolutely benefit taxpayers collectively. But here's where the tension lives. Not all tax dollars are spent efficiently. Not all spending priorities reflect everyone's values. Waste exists. Corruption exists. Political favoritism exists. Some groups benefit more than others depending on policy choices. So when someone says taxes benefit you, it's partly true. When someone says taxes just get wasted, that can also be partly true. The comforting version says, it's all good. The cynical version says, it's all theft. The harder version says, taxes are the price of maintaining large-scale civilization, and how well they benefit taxpayers depends on governance, transparency, and accountability. Taxes don't disappear into nothing, they turn into systems. The real debate isn't whether they benefit anyone. It's who benefits most, and how well they're managed. Story 39. That we live in a completely free society with equal rights and pure free will. Freedom exists, but it's layered. In many countries, people can vote, speak, protest, start businesses, move cities, choose careers. Compared to most of human history, that level of autonomy is extraordinary. But freedom isn't binary, it's constrained by economics, geography, law, culture, and biology. You're legally free to start a company, but if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that freedom is theoretical. You're legally free to move across the country, but if you're caring for family, tied to a job, or buried in debt, that freedom narrows. Speech may be protected by law, but social or professional consequences can still shape what people actually say. Equal rights on paper don't always translate to equal outcomes in practice. Access to good lawyers, quality education, healthcare, safe neighborhoods, and professional networks isn't evenly distributed. The rules may be the same, the starting lines aren't. And then there's free will. We like to believe every decision is purely ours, but upbringing, trauma, incentives, culture, algorithms, advertising, and even brain chemistry influence what feels like choice. You choose, but inside a web of pressures you didn't design. The comforting version says you're completely free. The cynical version says you're completely controlled. The harder version says freedom exists, but within constraints. It's real. It's just not absolute. Story 40. That the government, the issuer of its own currency, needs to get money from somewhere before it can spend it. At the household level, that's true. You have to earn or borrow before you spend. States and cities are similar. They can run out of money, but a sovereign government that issues its own fiat currency operates differently. When a country like the United States spends, it doesn't pull dollars from a vault. It instructs its central bank to credit bank accounts. New dollars are created electronically. That's how modern fiat systems work. Taxes and bond sales don't fund spending in the mechanical way people imagine. So why tax at all? Taxes create demand for the currency. If you owe taxes in dollars, you need dollars. Taxes also remove money from circulation, helping control inflation. Government bonds help manage interest rates and provide safe assets for investors. The constraint isn't running out of money. The constraint is inflation, productive capacity, and political will. If a government creates too much currency relative to the goods and services available, prices rise. That's the real limit, not a piggy bank running dry. The comforting version says the government's budget works just like yours. The harder version says currency issuers operate under macroeconomic constraints, not household constraints. That doesn't mean spending is unlimited or harmless. It means the rules are different at scale, and misunderstanding that difference shapes almost every political debate about debt, deficits, and public spending.